Sometimes terribly tragic things happen to familiar places, beloved places that we have taken for granted in our life or even in our faith walk, that enable us, or empower us rather, to not take them for granted, to look at old things new, to shake us up and see things with new eyes and better appreciate what we have. If ever there was a time in the church year that grants us opportunity for that, it's Holy Week. We must not just turn the Passion of our Lord into a theological boilerplate. Informed by John Pilch in the Context Group, we can see that the Markan report of the death of Jesus, that's the Passion according to Mark, foundational to the other two synoptic Passion stories, the one found in Matthew and the one found in Luke, presents Jesus as the perfect Mediterranean male, behaving the most honorable way as he faces death. Very early on in the gospel storyline of Mark, the Markan Jesus has made enemies of powerful people, Pharisees and Herodians. They resolve to kill him in Mark chapter 3, verse 6, way early on in the story. So Jesus' Nazareth family takes immediate action to save his life. They declare him crazy. He's out of his mind, Mark chapter 3, verse 21 reports. In the ancient Israelite world, if somebody shamed another person and did not make appropriate amends, that other person or his avenger was obliged to murder him. Well, Jesus has done that. He has shamed very powerful Herodians and Pharisees, and those men have avengers, and those avengers are going to take Jesus out. There is no escaping this fate, except if the offender's family declares that offending person crazy. But now, crazy family member cannot leave the family circle. He will never be let out of the house again. He cannot marry. He can't do his normal work. All normal life for this man has come to a halt. And so the offender might as well be dead. The Markan Jesus, my friends, is the offender. He never pulls back. He doesn't practice greater caution or prudence. He continues on, pissing people off throughout the storyline, until the chief priests and the scribes and the Jerusalem elites find a way to arrest him and have him put to death. Mark chapter 14, verses 1 to 2. When the Markan Jesus is put on trial, whether by the Sanhedrin in Mark chapter 14, verses 53 to 65, or under Pontius Pilate's authority, Mark chapter 15, verses 1 to 15, the game of challenge and repost, which Jesus, the Middle Eastern male, was a master of, the social game of competing for honor, is over. Going to court in the Middle East, the Mediterranean world, is shameful. A person who feels compelled to take another to court admits defeat by that course of action, even though that person may have bribed the judges to win the case. Look at Matthew chapter 5, verse 25 to 26. The only way out of jail in this world of the Bible is to bribe your way out. The community knows grievances should be worked out apart from the courts, since they were kangaroo courts, unreliable. Proverbs chapter 25, verses 8 to 10. Even Jesus affirmed that wisdom in Matthew chapter 5, verse 25. So now that the Markan Jesus has found himself in court, as it were, there is absolutely no way he can win. His fate is sealed. He did not have the wherewithal to head this off. He's a peasant folk healer, remember? In these final days, of the 12 that Jesus handpicked to be his innermost circle, one betrayed him, one denied him, and all abandoned him. This is not the gospel according to John, where the beloved one is with him till the end. No, nobody's with him to the end in Mark, the earliest gospel. So what is Jesus' best strategy? Well, suffer silently in truly Mediterranean manly fashion. If you have to respond, give pithy, cryptic responses. Otherwise, stay silent. Notice that the Markan Jesus gets crucified at 9 a.m. Passers-by revile him. The chief priests and scribes challenge him. Those crucified with him also abused him verbally. Again, note that this is not the Lucan version we just read Sunday, where there is a good thief and there is a bad thief. No, Luke adds all that. At noon, darkness comes over the land until 3 p.m. The Markan Jesus is hung on the cross for 6 hours, and in Mark's account he hasn't spoken or cursed or cried or shouted. He hasn't boasted. At 3 p.m., Jesus cries something out in Aramaic. While our written text is quite clear to read, and Mark provides us a translation, the bystanders were obviously confused. They thought he was calling for Elijah. You know, we have a beautiful Tenebrae tradition in our church. We have a beautiful tradition about the 7 last words or the 7 last sayings of Jesus. But we have to ask, did the historical Jesus actually speak intelligibly from the cross? Research on crucifixion notes that the victims of crucifixion did not die from loss of blood, but rather from suffocation. The posture of the crucified person makes it impossible for the diaphragm to work properly. Lungs do not inflate sufficiently with oxygen, so one gradually suffocates. Suffocation is not a pleasant sight to witness. My own mother, God rest her soul, died a very slow and painful death with total lung failure. I watched that. It is not an easy death. Some cancers, in like fashion, destroy the lungs, making breathing difficult and eventually impossible. The crucified person's mouth is open in order to gasp and grasp at whatever little oxygen it can. It becomes dry, speech becomes unintelligible, if not entirely impossible. What the Markan Jesus said after 6 hours on the cross was quite likely so garbled, it was misunderstood. Shortly after that, the Markan Jesus shrieked and died. The response of the centurion reported by Mark is very significant. Our English translation reads, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." Mark chapter 15, verse 39. The problem is the Greek text of Mark does not have a definite article before son. Hence, the proper translation of the centurion's remark is, "Truly, this man was a Son of God." I mean, the centurion was not a believer. He was a polytheist. So we must consider what Son of God would mean to a person like him. As a soldier in charge of 100 men, actually it was 80 men, not 100, men who were not always engaged in battle, this centurion was familiar with how stalwart soldiers amused themselves. Out in the barracks, they would fight each other, wrestle, they'd have contests of strength, and often one man in the barracks was stronger than all the rest. Such a soldier would be considered more than human, better than human, or a son of a god. That is, having godlike qualities. So the centurion's comment recognizes something about Jesus, who languishes in silence for 6 hours in perfectly Mediterranean manly fashion. What the soldier is saying, in effect, is, what a badass. He died like a Mediterranean hero, with honor. Specifically, what impressed the Mediterranean centurion is how he breathed his last. That is, the manner in which Jesus died. Perhaps this centurion had witnessed so many crucifixions that Jesus's surprised him. The victim was naked, not like our crucifixes that we see Jesus with the little white cloth underwear. There was none of that in an actual crucifixion. Naked. Stress caused the victim to defecate and urinate on himself. The experience made the victim almost crazy, agonizing pain. He would scream and curse and shriek and cry and befoul himself, not able to control his genitals. The body does weird things when it's crucified. The sphincter is out of control, as is the bladder. Few, if any, crucified people behaved like the legendary Eleazar or the 7 young men in 2 Maccabees, or like Jesus, the way all the Gospels report him dying. So in effect, this centurion is saying, I have seen many men crucified, but I have never seen anyone die like this, bearing his pain and suffering in silence and screaming only at the very end. Truly extraordinary. Truly godlike. This interpretation is a culturally plausible explanation of the event, as it may indeed have occurred at the actual crucifixion. Gospel formation stage 1. In the Gospel called Mark, written some 40 years later, the evangelist we name Mark has reinterpreted the event, which is why some translations report the centurion's words as, "Truly this man was the," should read a, "Son of God." But what does it mean for Jesus to suffer on behalf of believers? We will explore that in a couple days.